Thank you everyone for joining us, both the people here at the United Nations headquarters, where the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Preparatory Committee for the 11th review conference is taking place. We also have, I believe, sorry, Zoom is asking me to do things. We also have over 100 participants joining online, so welcome everyone. It appears that this is a very timely conversation on interfaith, and I was going to share with you that I actually sent out kind of the concept note and official invitations. I had discussed things with all of the participants prior to this, but I sent the notes Monday morning, April 21st at 6 a.m. It was the first thing that I did that morning. I didn't even look at the news. And then I looked at the news and saw that Pope Francis had passed away. And so now this feels like a continuation. It is very much a timely conversation. I think the nuclear weapons mean different things to different people. To some people, nuclear weapons are about security. To some people, nuclear weapons are about human health and human rights. To others, they're about the health of our environment and sustainable development. And yet to others, they are about the economic inequities in our societies. But given their devastating humanitarian consequences, both in the past, in the present, and the potential ones in the future, I think what we're going to discuss today is the way in which nuclear weapons are actually a matter of morality and ethics. And of course, we're not alone in bringing this up. During significant times of change, both in the 1960s and when there was a halting of the atmospheric testing, and in the 1980s, when there was really a reversal in the nuclear arms race, what we had was engagement of faith leaders and faith communities on these issues. And the key question I think we want to address today is how can we bring that back? How can we not only awaken individual faith communities to these issues, but also bring them together to help us achieve a more peaceful world and one that is free of nuclear weapons. And of course, the Pope announcement right now happening right as we speak is absolutely kind of a stunning event right here, right now, in a worldwide event. The passing of Pope Francis for this particular issue is still truly devastating. He didn't just believe that nuclear weapons abolition was necessary. He also believed that it was possible. He was a staunch supporter of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And he stated on more than one occasion that it was not just the use of nuclear weapons that was immoral, but that their mere possession was immoral. And he stated this at the Vatican, as well as in Hiroshima in 2019. And the conversation, of course, is also timely given the current state of our world, the current conflicts and tensions that are taking place right as we speak in Kashmir, between India and Pakistan, two nuclear armed states. In Ukraine, we have involvement, direct and indirect involvement of nuclear armed states. Same thing for Gaza and the Middle East more broadly. So this is really a very dangerous moment, and I guess that's exemplified by the way in which the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist has actually set its clock, the closest it has ever been, at 89 seconds to midnight. So again, we'll ask today, how can faith communities come together? We have three incredible speakers here in the room and two speakers joining us online. And I will be introducing each of them in turn. They'll speak and give some general remarks, and then we'll have a little bit of a general discussion followed by a Q&A with the audience. Both we'll try to engage both our online audience and our audience here in the room. So thank you again all for being with us. Our panelists are all incredibly impressive and accomplished, and it would be absolutely impossible for me to do justice to their individual bios and CVs. So they will have to forgive me, and you will have to forgive me when I just give you a little bit of a snippet. And I will begin, we will first hear from Professor Jeffrey Sachs. He, of course, doesn't need an introduction in any fora, let alone here at the United Nations. But I will highlight two things that some of you might not know about him, or that maybe even many people don't know. One is that, of course, he has degrees from Harvard University, a bachelor's, a master's, a PhD in economics, but he also has 42 honorary doctorates from around the world. And at Columbia University, his title is, and this is the part where people just miss it because they think it's just like any other professor. It's not. His title is University Professor. That is the highest academic title awarded by the university. There are currently 8 university professors at Columbia. And the very first university professor, when this rank was established in 1964, was the famous physicist, Nobel Prize winning physicist, I.I. Rabi, who is known to the disarmament community as a voice of conscience at the dawn, and continued to be such a voice in the nuclear age. So without further ado, let me invite Professor Sachs to give us his thoughts on where we are in the world, and really this broader question of how can faith communities come together to help create a better world.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be with everybody. And on this very dramatic moment, the first American Pope, first United States Pope, we had an American Pope from the Americas with Pope Francis, a remarkable pontiff. And now the new Pope just announced, and I see that he's taken the name Pope Leo the 14th, which is itself very notable, because it was Pope Leo the 13th that established the tradition known as the Church's modern social teachings, with the first of the modern encyclicals of 1891 called Rerum Novarum, which is an encyclical about the morality of the new industrial age and what to do about it. And I raise that. I hope the name signifies a continuity of that tradition, because the church has played a very, very important role on the question of peace. And it has, in its social teachings, been very important and remarkable as one of the few places that reaches the whole world and that speaks on behalf of the whole world. And I would just like to indicate a few cases of that, and then talk about interreligious dialogue more generally. But in 1963, Pope John the 23rd issued the encyclical Pacem in Terris, Peace on Earth, in the spring of 1963, in his dying days, actually. And it was inspired and motivated by the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962. And Pope John the 23rd wanted to find a way to support Kennedy and Khrushchev in 1963 to step back from the brink of nuclear war. And the three of them together succeeded, because the encyclical made a big effect both on Khrushchev and Kennedy, And it was followed within a few weeks by the signing of the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And this, to my mind, was an example of one of the decisive moments in modern history where the voice of religious leaders could make a decisive difference in the world. 4 years later, Pope Paul VI issued an encyclical called Populorum Progressio, also in that same Catholic social teaching tradition. And that is quite notable because it made the link of peace and development. In fact, there's a section of that encyclical that says development is the new name of peace. And it's quite a remarkable statement, because what Pope Paul VI was saying was that poverty and instability breeds conflict, and conflict breeds the risk of global disaster, and that development is therefore the pathway to peace. And this is very much, of course, the spirit of the United Nations as well, which has as its pillars peace, sustainable development, and human rights as three intertwined domains that together are mutually interconnected and mutually necessary. Pope Francis continued in that great tradition of the Catholic social teachings with two encyclicals, one Laudato Si, which was the Church's message regarding the ecological crisis, and it was issued in the spring of 2015, a few weeks after which Pope Francis opened the assembly on September 25th, 2015, here at the UN, that adopted the Sustainable Development Goals. And the encyclical played a significant role in those goals and in the Paris Agreement that was gaveled on December 12th, 2015, where the Pope played a personal role as well in helping to bring world leaders to the consensus on the Paris Agreement. The Pope's final encyclical, or next encyclical, was Fratelli Tutti in 2019. And that's also very relevant for us because Pope Francis's core message was dialogue and connection with the other and no exclusion for our own safety and our own good and our own humanity. And that encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, is dedicated for the first time in the Church's history to a Muslim leader, to the Grand Imam of Al-Aqsa. And the encyclical opens with the history of St. Francis of Assisi in the Fifth Crusade, traveling to Egypt and meeting the Sultan Al-Kamil al-Malik on the battlefield of the Fifth Crusade. They spent the night in theological discourse and debate. Neither side converted the other, but in the end, St. Francis was escorted peacefully from the camp, and it showed the encounter of the two great faiths of Christianity and Islam. And Pope Francis wanted to emphasize how crucial dialogue is. One of the great failings in our world in recent years has been almost a complete absence of dialogue. The United States government has not spoken with the Russian government at a senior level until President Trump came in and opened a new dialogue with President Putin. And typically he was roundly criticized for that. How dare you talk to the other side? In this, President Trump is completely correct. It was Biden who refused to have diplomacy with Putin after February 22nd, 2022, 24th, 2022. And this was a great failing because the war in Ukraine not only continued uselessly, but brought us to the brink of nuclear war, especially in the fall of 2022, and not less today, because this war remains not only very costly in lives and in destruction, but extraordinarily dangerous till this moment. It can absolutely spiral out of control. Well, I think the spirit of interreligious communion for peace is essentially about dialogue across faiths and mutual respect across faiths. And this is a very hard thing to achieve, but we have leaders that are committed to it. Our new Pope, we trust, is committed to helping to lead in this line. I don't know him personally, but he is described as being in the Augustinian tradition and the tradition of the community and the tradition of Pope Francis's pastoral approach, which is very, very promising. We have profound failures right now of dialogue that are catastrophic in several areas: in Ukraine, in the Middle East, in India and Pakistan, and in the Far East, where the United States has talked openly of war with China, which is a mind-bogglingly wrong-headed, dangerous, one would think surrealistic, but all too realistic discussion in Washington. And in my view and my experience, I know both sides of every one of these conflicts pretty well. It is the failure of dialogue that is the most fundamental problem. In conflicts, there are legitimate concerns on both sides, but there's always demonization of one side by the other side, and always the claim there's no one to talk to on the other side, there's no one to make peace with on the other side, and at least extremists on both sides inevitably in a spiral of death, and that there's no alternative but to fight to win. And this is always wrong. If you know both sides of a conflict, you understand that this needs a very different kind of solution from war. Everywhere needs mutual understanding, mutual respect, a legitimate turn to solutions. All wars, in my view, as Clausewitz said famously, are politics with other means, and the only solution to politics is politics. It's not war. And so there is no solution to Ukraine except for mutual security of Ukraine and Russia. And I underscore mutual because both sides have true security concerns, not just Ukraine, but also Russia, which we have deliberately ignored. When it comes to the Palestinian question, there is no doubt that the only solution is Palestinian self-determination and political rights, and that has been denied by the Israeli side. And until there is dialogue and mutual respect, there will never be peace in the Middle East. And my view is there needs to be a state of Palestine welcomed in the two-state solution immediately. And the United States has been the only veto of that solution in the last decades. When it comes to India and Pakistan, they don't even talk with each other. And they would both have so much benefit in economic development, in security, safety, addressing ecological crises in the Himalayas, in the watersheds that they share together, if they actually opened up dialogue. And when it comes to the East Asian crisis of the US and China, I will just share my own view of, based on travels of, I'm sure, well over 100 trips to China during the last 41 years, that China is no enemy of the United States, no threat to the United States, and no reason for conflict between the two countries other than the false mindset of who's number one, which is the most ridiculous, absurd, uninteresting, and doomed to fail question of humanity. It's not even a meaningful idea. It's not a meaningful concept. It's not a measurable concept. What we want is decent life for everybody, not who's number one, which means nothing. So all of this is to say that the concept of dialogue and mutual respect is the key, and religious leaders should be in the forefront of that. I hope and trust that the new Pope will be. I know that the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, speaks that language. I know that the Patriarch of the Greek Patriarch Bartholomew is one of the great leaders for ecumenism and for interreligious dialogue and understanding. And our job is to help promote that everywhere and call on the religious leaders to play their role in not only helping their own congregants to understand the stakes, but to help the ones who probably need the education the most, our politicians, to understand the stakes. We're in the hands of politicians that don't necessarily know very much about these issues, but they have the power to destroy the world. And that's why we're here right now, to help educate them to do better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for those simultaneously inspiring and sobering remarks. The state of our world is truly alarming, but we have to keep pushing forward and be asking for a better future. Next, we will hear from Dr. Andrea Bartoli, who is the president of the San Egidio Foundation for Peace and Dialogue and a member of the San Egidio community since 1970. He's currently a senior research scholar at Columbia and a member of the Board of Trustees at Soka University of America. He has served as dean at both Seton Hall University and George Mason University. Andrea is an anthropologist with a scholarly interest in genocide. He has participated in numerous peace efforts around the globe, including most recently in the Central African Republic and in South Sudan. Andrea, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ivana. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a great honor to follow Jeff. We shared the podium a few times at the Prayer for Peace, this moment that the community of Sant'Egidio does around the world after the moment that John Paul II started in Assisi, where all religious leaders came together. And this is an extraordinary moment for the Catholic Church, because I'm delighted to hear Professor Sachs reminding us all the recent popes and what they are saying about peace and development and so on. But I'm pretty sure that everybody remembered that when Francis the Saint was going there, I would say the majority of the Christians, the majority of the Catholics were actually on the other side. They were doing the Crusades. So the conversation was internal to the religion, right? And I think that this problem is still there. I don't think that we are speaking enough of the divisions within the religion. India doesn't bomb Pakistan just because. I think it's very important for us to realize that there is a conversation, there is a dialogue that is within the religion. I don't think that anybody is expecting the Vatican anytime to proclaim a new crusade, and that's a good sign. Nor I think that I have here a friend that knows many Protestant and I don't think that anybody will expect Protestant and Catholic to kill each other, but they did it for quite some time. And if we look into Islam, into Judaism, into Hinduism, in a strange way, even Buddhism, it's interesting how in Japan, Buddhists were able to kill other Buddhists. And so my point here is that the first responsibility of religious communities is to dialogue internally and to make sure that the religions as a whole are able to talk to others. The second point is about knowledge. What is truly unifying for religious tradition, for all spiritual tradition, for all human tradition, is the search of the truth. And we need to realize that that is a responsibility that cannot be owned by mind. And I'm saying this as a Catholic that struggled with truth in many different ways, right? Including the infallibility and all that. But the point here is that I really like Pascal's image of human knowledge as a sphere. And the more the sphere grows, the more the point of connection to the unknown grows. And we need to accept that the more we are growing in this knowledge, the more we need to realize how fragile that knowledge is and how we need to be careful about saying that what we know is sure, is certain. Think about how many retractions in scientific journals, how many times we need to accept that actually we made a mistake, not because we wanted to make a mistake, but because we couldn't do better. So why should we expect that we build 2,000, actually 130,000, they say, nuclear weapons, and we should just be okay? How can reasonable that can be? The title that was given to me is Nuclear Weapons and Genocide, Opportunities for Community Engagement and Citizen Diplomacy. And my response to that is that I welcome that title as a gift, because I think that religious tradition and spiritual community should say no to nuclear weapons, as it was reminded for us. The Catholic Church is very clear, but also no to genocide, because religious communities, as I said before, and human communities participated in genocide before it was named. The name is recent. The name is a gift of the crazy Nazi perfection of genocide. But humans have done genocide way before, and now continue to do genocide even in a silent way, in this destruction of the environment that is causing death and suffering. And look what? Nuclear weapons, their productions, their stocking, their storaging is actually contributing to that silent genocide. So the no needs to be no to genocide, no to nuclear weapons, and the yes needs to be to knowledge, to searching and understanding. And as a scholar, Dr. Hughes was mentioning before my interest in genocide prevention and more recently on nuclear disarmament, I focus on actual cases of nuclear disarmament. And I've been fascinated by Megaton to Megawatts, this program where Russians and Americans destroyed 20,000, the equivalent of 20,000 uranium-based bombs to create American electricity, 10% of the American electricity for 20 years. An enormous amount of wealth, an enormous result on the environment side, very positive because the energy was carbon-free. Nobody knows, very few knows about it. We are certainly not learning enough about it. But if we look at the plutonium side, and I actually need to thank a person that Professor Hughes knows very well, that is Emlyn Hughes, a physicist at Columbia University, that pointed out the importance on the other side of the equation, that is plutonium. We didn't resolve technically the problem of plutonium the same way, not well enough, not in a way that is economically convincing, not in a way that is environmentally convincing, not in a way that will avoid the problem of proliferation, because we are continuing to produce plutonium in all nuclear reactors around the world, and people can do that and then create new nuclear weapons. So my invitation is here to take seriously knowledge, and to take seriously the investment in understanding, especially related to plutonium, to try to solve technically the problem. I know that Professor Sachs is not only at Columbia University, but in the US has this technical network that I think it's a super interesting construction, because a lot of these problems have very serious scientific and technical difficulties. We cannot just accept the moral argument. We need to go deeper into the knowledge discipline of understanding what does it mean to undo a nuclear weapon? What does it mean to really disarm? What does it mean to take the uranium, dilute the uranium, create the electricity, and make sure that the uranium cannot be used for another human bomb, for another nuclear bomb anymore? We need to do the same for plutonium, and we need to do the same, making sure that all the religious groups continue that work, that fundamental discipline of keeping themselves on the side of dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for really that call to action and linking so beautifully the efforts, the past with the present and the future, and the efforts in ensuring peace with efforts on nuclear disarmament. They're very much linked. Now we will hear from Ivana Ikeda, who is the UN representative of Soka Gakkai International, a Buddhist community-based organization which promotes peace, culture, and education. Anna is a graduate of Soka University of America and holds a master's degree from the University of Denver in international human rights. Her work centers around disarmament, both nuclear abolition, as well as stopping killer robots. And just to speak on a personal note, for me personally, Anna has really been one of the brightest lights in the nuclear disarmament movement. So welcome, Anna. Please, you may begin your remarks.
Well, thank you so much, Ivana, for the kind introduction. And also thank you to Nuclear Age Peace Foundation for convening this discussion and inviting my organization, Soka Gakkai International, to be part of it. I'd like to first echo Ivana that it's actually very timely that we're having this conversation as we mourn the recent passing of Pope Francis, who was truly a champion of peace and nuclear abolition, and received the exciting news of the election of the new Pope. So as mentioned, I am Ivana Ikeda, and I'm a representative to the UN for disarmament of Soka Gakkai International, SGI. At SGI, we engage in various issues, including nuclear disarmament at the UN and at grassroots levels, based on our Buddhist principles of the utmost respect for dignity of life and deep conviction in human capacity to transform our realities, which I'll explain further later. And our engagement in nuclear disarmament originates from the 1957 anti-nuclear declaration made by the second president of the Soka Gakkai, Josei Toda. And in his declaration, Toda condemned nuclear weapons, which threaten humanity's right to live, as an embodiment of the bleakest aspects of the human heart. So based on my organization's long-standing commitment, today I'd like to offer some insights that may shed some light on how to advance nuclear disarmament, a goal clearly articulated in Article 6 of the NPT, and move toward a more peaceful world from a Buddhist perspective. But before I go further, I do want to note that within Buddhism, I'm sure all of you know, there are many different traditions and schools of thought, and I can only speak for my own Buddhist faith tradition as practiced by the Soka Gakkai, which is based on the teachings of Nichiren Daishonin, a 13th century Japanese monk, as well as Shakyamuni Buddha's teachings of the Lotus Sutra. And one of the core tenets of our Buddhist practice is that each person possesses within themselves what we call Buddha nature or Buddhahood. And our goal is to reveal that inner potential. So this means that we all have the innate capacity to transform even the most negative situations into something positive. and experience happiness no matter what our circumstances. The key aspect of this belief is the process of inner transformation, what we call human revolution in the Soka Gakkai. In other words, every change from our personal relations to transforming our society ultimately starts with changing ourselves, which is sometimes a hard pill to swallow. Right. And, I don't have time to get into details about this concept, nor is this the right forum. I would just say that this is the most empowering concept. So how does this relate to nuclear disarmament, you might ask? Well, in recent years, SGI has been urging the nuclear weapon states to adopt the policy of no first use, especially within the context of the NPT, in order to reduce the nuclear risks and open a path for nuclear disarmament. We believe that such a policy would significantly enhance the global security climate, and we were pleased that it is included in the current draft recommendation for the NPT review conference. In the statement to the 2022 NPT review conference, late SGI President Daisaku Ikeda stated, and I quote, "Until now, the prime focus of nuclear deterrence policy has been to dissuade adversaries from using nuclear weapons, a goal pursued by expanding nuclear arsenals. States should take a step back and turn the severe gaze they presently direct at the threat posed by other states toward the threat inherent in their own nuclear doctrines. I call on all states to earnestly focus on the contributions they each can make to the prevention of nuclear war and to dramatically reducing the risk of nuclear weapons use," unquote. At the UN forum like this, unfortunately, we often hear that while a world without nuclear weapons is our shared goal, the current global security climate is not conducive to advancing nuclear disarmament. Well, this means that we risk perpetually getting trapped in the current state of being at the brink of nuclear annihilation, precisely because each country is making other countries' actions and policies the determinants and conditions for their own. So our call for no first use is thus rooted in a Buddhist philosophy of self-empowerment, a call for all states to choose their own future for collective security. I would also say that the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW, was a prime example of such self-empowerment, where non-nuclear weapon states decided that they did not have to wait for nuclear weapon states to make progress toward nuclear disarmament. It is a reminder that we each have the power to make a difference. And also, we find the most powerful examples of empowerment and human capacity for change in the voices of hibakusha and others from the affected communities. Despite their pain and trauma, they continue to awaken us to the inhumanity of nuclear weapons, yet never losing faith in humanity. We have the moral obligation to heed their voice. Additionally, it's important that as faith communities, we challenge the concept of nuclear deterrence as a security concern that threatens us all, rather than protect us. In an article published in the Boston Review last September, Professor Elaine Scarry of Harvard University listed the flaws of nuclear deterrence as explained by General Lee Butler. She wrote, quote, "Even before any missiles are launched or populations are slain, deterrence destroys the minds and souls of those who have to bandy about the word deterrence." Butler worries that the cavalier reference to killing millions of people must harm anyone speaking that way, unquote. I believe her comment is consistent with Pope Francis' assertion that the mere possession of nuclear weapons is immoral. In the Lotus Sutra, there is a story called Parable of the Three Carts in the Burning House. According to this parable, a wealthy man's house suddenly catches fire. However, his children who are inside remain unaware of the danger in which they are placed and show neither surprise nor fear. The man then finds ways to entice the children to come out of their own accord, thus enabling all to exit the burning house unharmed. We are in the burning house today. We have been for the last 80 years. However, the public still remains unaware of the present threat. And those countries that possess and depend on nuclear weapons also continue to underplay the dangers, just like the children in the parable. I believe it is the responsibility of faith communities, in particular, to help find a way out of the burning house, to avoid the collective planetary suicide and save everyone, including those contributing to the current dangers. We must make this year, marking 80 years since the Trinity test, atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and founding of the United Nations, a year of action toward nuclear disarmament. And Audrey, Jonathan, and I are part of the Voices for a World Free of Nuclear Weapons, which is part of the United Religions Initiative. And we have been marking August 6th as Nuclear Prayer Day. So we invite everyone to take prayerful actions on and toward August 6th, and I'm happy to share more individually if you're interested. So to conclude, I'd like to quote a famous passage from the Russell-Einstein Manifesto, which was issued 7 years ago. Remember your humanity and forget the rest. If you can do so, the way lies open to a new paradise. If you cannot, there lies before you the risk of universal death. I thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anna, for such inspiring remarks. Really appreciate you bringing up the Hibakusha, especially in this 80th anniversary year. And I love what you said about them having experienced really the most tragic, worst thing you could possibly experience, and yet never losing faith in humanity. Thank you for that, as well as the Lotus Sutra story. That was the burning house is a very, very powerful analogy. Thank you so much. We are now going to hear from Ms. Audrey Kitagawa, who is the president of the International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation and Light of Awareness International Spiritual Family. She's a member of the Advisory Council of the G20 Interfaith Forum. She is a former attorney and a recipient of many awards and honors from around the world. Ms. Kitagawa is the inaugural member of the United Nations Environment Programme's Faith for Earth Interfaith Women Council. She's a UN representative for United Religions Initiative, a trustee for the International Center for Religion and Diplomacy, and a member of the Advisory Council of the Global Security Institute. Ms. Kitagawa, thank you so much for joining us, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ivana, and good afternoon, everyone. I wish to express my deepest appreciation to the organizers of this event for this invitation to share with you about respect for all religions coming together in a fractured world, and what are the mechanisms by which interfaith leaders could outreach to their communities and vice versa to raise awareness on what is at stake and how we can change the status quo. Inherent in this question is a recognition of the significant role of religious and spiritual communities, because persons of faith have important moral and ethical voices of conscience to help direct individual and collective conduct in the world. The word interfaith relates to members of different religions and their interactions with each other. This coming together is a reaffirmation of the importance of modeling cooperation and collaboration in the inherent recognition that this issue of nuclear weapons is too huge for any one constituency to address alone, and that it would take this coming together of potentially siloed communities to work toward achieving the mutual goal of nuclear weapons disarmament. We can observe what happens when any one country attempts to go rogue, but uses the modality of hierarchical power of dominance and license to do what it wants to do without regard to the rule of law and institutional bodies that have been crafted during the last 80 years to protect the vulnerable and human rights of all people. This body of legal instruments and adjudicatory processes demonstrate the multilateral processes that took place to craft these international legal instruments for the mutual benefit of the common good. The establishment of the United Nations itself was envisioned to have engagement of multilateral processes, the coming together of sovereign states to work collaboratively for this common good. Albert Einstein dedicated himself to the cause of nuclear disarmament in the last decade of his life. He believed that a world government based on international cooperation was necessary to ensure peace and prevent a nuclear holocaust. He deeply regretted his role in initiating the Manhattan Project, expressing his belief that he made a great mistake by advising President Roosevelt about the potential of nuclear fission. He expressed concern about the dangers of nuclear weapons and their proliferation and the possibility of a world war that could lead to universal destruction. Presciently, he said, "There is no foreseeable defense against atomic bombs. America has temporary superiority in armaments, but it is certain that we have no lasting secret." He noted that the atomic bomb had changed everything except our way of thinking, and the solution lies in the heart of mankind. People of faith are a huge resource that can be mobilized to address this serious existential threat. Rooted in local communities, but associated with global networks, they are profoundly effective platforms that they provide for mobilizing support for disarmament and peace. Religious organizations offer a moral counterweight to nationalistic and militaristic narratives, challenging them with an ethical perspective and promoting the sacredness and value of each and every human life. Through prayer, education, and public advocacy, faith leaders can awaken the conscience and inspire action. We should remember the significant, multifaceted role which religious communities played in shaping both the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They influenced the drafting and adoption of these documents by advocating for the inclusion of human rights provisions and providing ethical frameworks for the protection of fundamental rights. They use their influence and networks to persuade governments and international organizations to adopt these principles. These are the foundational documents of the UN, which help to inspire generations of leaders and people all around the world. Though it has taken many years, I share the good news about the progress which communities of faith have made within the UN. Faith communities have been increasingly recognized as significant partners in the work of the UN. We observed that in 2010, the creation of the UN Interagency Task Force on Religion and Sustainable Development. It facilitates knowledge sharing, capacity building, and system-wide guidance on engaging with faith-based organizations and civil society actors. Its primary goal is to deepen the UN system's understanding of the intersection between religion and the UN's core areas of work, including development, human rights, and peace and security. We observe the creation of the Multi-Faith Advisory Council, which provides strategic advice and support to the UN on thematic priorities. The Multi-Faith Advisory Council brings together representatives of 35 faith-based partners, reflecting the diversity of religions and beliefs. We also observe the creation of the United Nations Environment Programme's Faith for Earth and the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative, and the recent inaugural launch of the Faith for Earth's Women's Council. Communities of faith must deepen their lobbying and advocacy for nuclear weapons disarmament by contacting government officials and policymakers. Their participation in international conferences and meetings to discuss disarmament issues have built coalitions with other faith leaders and organizations. It is imperative for communities of faith to raise awareness about nuclear weapons by leveraging their moral authority, organizing joint statements and events, and providing resources for action. They should continue to foster interfaith dialogue and engage with governments to advocate for disarmament. On the political level, we can see the importance of diplomacy, which is the art and practice of conducting negotiations and maintaining relationships between nations or groups to achieve peaceful outcomes and resolve conflicts. It involves communication, negotiation, and the use of tact and skill to avoid conflict and build cooperation. Let us recall that former Secretary of State George Shultz said that trust is a currency of diplomacy. The building of trust is foundational within the purview of religious and spiritual values and teachings. It speaks to the inherent integrity and truthfulness which each person must have in order to build trust in relationships. As Professor Bartoli said, what we find for all human traditions is the search for truth. There was a great master many years ago that said, "Know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." On the ground, faith communities can hold prayer vigils at international events or community gatherings that can raise awareness and mobilize support for disarmament. Prayer changes things when we pray, believe, and the power of prayer to create transformation in the hearts and minds of people everywhere for peace works, if we would but apply this sacred tool for positive change. We can develop educational materials, conduct training workshops, and utilize online platforms to share information and resources to wider audiences. On August 6th through 9th of this year, the 80th anniversary of the dropping of the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki will be marked by an international panoply of events, from prayer vigils to community activities to public talks, to remind us that the face of suffering that came from this horrific event has a human face, and never again should such suffering ever be experienced by the deployment of nuclear weapons to destroy precious lives. As Albert Einstein said, the solution lies in the heart of mankind. All of the examples shared are examples of the heart in action by living our values, practicing ethical conduct, and adhering to a strong moral compass. Through these daily practices, we can develop the heart of compassion, kindness, and love. We must actively engage in the support, education, and encouragement of our religious and spiritual communities to become actively involved on nuclear weapons disarmament. Every loving heart will add to the collective movement towards peace. We must continuously forge ahead and never give up on what doing the right thing to inform, affirm, and protect the sacredness and sanctity of life. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kitagawa. Just adding back our spotlights. Thank you so much for those truly insightful remarks, and also all of the work that you're doing to advance interfaith dialogue on so many issues. But as you stated so clearly, this is truly one of those issues where we quite simply must come together. I also really appreciated all of the quotes by Einstein. I also like one in particular where he says, "I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but I know that World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." And I think that that also tells us exactly how he felt about living in the nuclear age. So last but not least, absolutely not least, is Mr. Jonathan Granoff, who is an author, attorney, and international advocate, and who emphasizes the legal and ethical dimensions of human development and security with a specific focus on advancing the rule of law to address international security and the threats posed by nuclear weapons. He serves on numerous governing boards and advisory boards, including Lawyers Committee on Nuclear Policy, Fortune Forum, Jane Goodall Institute, the NGO Committee on Disarmament, Peace and Security, Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, and Middle Powers Initiative. He is the recipient of the Rutgers University School of Law's Arthur Armitage Distinguished Alumni Award. He has presented expert testimony in the parliaments of Canada and the United Kingdom, as well as the US Congress and the United Nations. Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Years ago, I wrote a law review article, and I was arguing in the law review article that
Can get you a little
Yeah, there-
closer, yeah.
I was arguing in the law review article that there are ethical norms in all civilizations, which when they're violated, instability arises, and when they're honored, stability arises. Every religion has some articulation of the golden rule. Either refrain from harming others as you don't want to be harmed, or affirmatively treat others as you want to be treated. You find this in Christianity, in Judaism, in Islam, in the Native American traditions, in Seneca, in Confucius, in Taoism, in Jainism. And nuclear weapons clearly violate this norm. The idea that 9 countries could say these are good for us, but not good for anybody else is patently absurd. Imagine if the Biological Weapons Convention said no country can use smallpox or polio as a weapon. But in order to maintain stability in the world, we'll let 9 countries use the plague as a weapon. Well, just intuitively, that's absurd. And the reason it's absurd is that it offends our moral sensibility. Because that moral sensibility comes from our common humanity. And the golden rule comes from that. So one night around 1:30 in the morning, I got a call from Robert McNamara. Now, you realize when you write a law review article and you say the sun's going to come up tomorrow, you have to cite the National Weather Service. It's not good enough to say that it's been happening for billions of years. You need authority. So I made this first premise about the golden rule, and I had a footnote in a law review article. And I got a call. Granoff, McNamara here. Just what? I'm, half asleep. What is it? What is it? Why are you calling? He said, I want to tell you, I'm writing a book called Wilson's Ghost about what I've learned, and I want to cite your footnote. I said, well, you don't need my permission. What footnote is it? It's the footnote about the golden rule. I said, well, that's fair use. You don't need my permission. He said, no. The reason I'm calling you is I want to tell you that until I read it, I didn't know that Buddhists and Muslims had the golden rule. Now, if there's anything that highlights is the importance of interfaith dialogue. It's the importance of knowing what I responded to Secretary McNamara, which was the following. In all due respect, sir, the golden rule does not come from religion. It comes from the architecture of our humanity. It comes from the human conscience, and all people have that. And his answer really floored me. He's in his 80s. I know, I'm just learning this. Now, that to me is a man of wisdom and humility. Anyone in their 80s who's still learning, that's a man of wisdom. Interesting that. So I learned a lot from that experience. And so I was been very involved in interfaith dialogue for many years. And I believe that it would be beneficial if we articulated a golden rule for the 21st century. Because although all of the golden rules have a core sense of equality and justice and compassion, they're said a little differently. And when they were stated, you could only injure the people that were your contemporaries. But that's not the case now. We now hold in our gift the future. And the way in which we fuel our cars, the way in which we pursue security puts the future at risk. That wasn't the case. We have to decide whether we will be the last generation. When Jesus said, do unto others, that wasn't, you couldn't melt the polar ice cap. You couldn't do it even if you wanted to. But today we're doing it. We're doing it. When Buddha said it, we couldn't destroy the phytoplankton, our third lung. When Hillel said it, we couldn't use nuclear weapons. So I think we should have a golden rule for the 21st century. Treat the lives and well-being of future generations as we want to be treated. And that all religions could adopt that. So I'm publicly saying I will be promoting this, and I ask all of you to promote this. What I think is a self-evident truism that hasn't been articulated. It shouldn't be identified with any person, and certainly not a person as flawed as me. It's an ought. The power of ought is enormous. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. God, when that was stated, it did not include women, it did not include indigenous people, people of color, nor white men without property. But it had the kernel of that equity in it. And that ought becomes a compass point. And the ought of the golden rule is something we all try to live by, but we fall far short of it. So what? It's true. And just because we're not perfect, it doesn't reduce the truth of the value of the golden rule. So one of the reasons why religion should be involved in this issue is it violates a core ethical principle of every religion. The second reason why religion should be involved in it, the best quote that I have come across that articulates, at least for me, is from George Kennan. Really odd, you know, I like to cite Robert McNamara, George Kennan, people you wouldn't think would be disarmament people. George Kennan said, the readiness for younger people, he was the architect of the Cold War theory of containment and associated with hard-nosed, quote unquote, realpolitik. Not a leftist idealist like myself. He said, the readiness to use nuclear weapons against other human beings, against people we do not know, whom we've never seen, and whose guilt or innocence is not for us to establish, and in doing so, to place in jeopardy the natural structure upon which all civilization rests, as though the safety and perceived interests of our own generation were more important than everything that has taken place or could take place in civilization. This is nothing less than a presumption, a blasphemy, an indignity of monstrous dimensions offered to God. That's very strong language. Now I think, are we all culpable of this? Are we all responsible for this? In some way we are, if we're silent. But you know, there's only two people, and over 90% of the weapons are in the hands of the Russian Republic and the United States, okay? So I think about like how two human beings carry the weight of this responsibility. I think that's immoral to put that burden on anybody. But I also think that it highlights how precarious our moment is. When the president of the United States said, we're going to invade Iraq and the people of Baghdad will come out with flowers in celebration, my wife said, nah, I don't think so. And when Putin said he was going to invade Ukraine and the people of Kiev would greet the Russians with flowers in celebration, I told my wife, nah, I don't think so. Now, you could have asked any cab driver in Baghdad or Kiev, and they would have told you that the invading army would not be greeted with flowers in celebration. And yet, heads of countries with huge nuclear arsenals don't have as much common sense sometimes as cab drivers. And for us to be silent in this predicament of human beings no more wise than any of us with this power, what if Boris Yeltsin was having a bad day when the weather satellite was launched off the coast of Norway in 1995? And the Norwegians told the Russians that this was going to be a weather satellite going up to the North Pole, but it looked like it was going to be an electromagnetic pulse exploded over Moscow and destroying the command and control of Russia. For 8 minutes, the world's fate hung in the balance. And Yeltsin said he wasn't worried because he knew Bill Clinton and he knew he wouldn't do it. In other words, it was the human element of trust that made the difference. And that is the currency of the realm, and that's of inestimable importance. And Dr. Sachs's point of dialogue, debate, discussion, compromise, never dehumanizing the other is core to our going forward. And that is the purview of religion. That religion is a two-edged sword. The first religious statement in the nuclear age was by Robert Oppenheimer, "I've now become death, destroyer of worlds," in the Bhagavad Gita. But wait a minute, what happened when the International Court of Justice addressed the issue? Judge Weeramanthi cited the Ramayana, in which Lakshmana, the half-brother of Ram, who represents all virtue and goodness, is fighting the evil Ravana, who has stolen his wife. And Lakshmana comes and says, "I have a weapon that can destroy the entire race of our enemies." And Ram says, "By ancient tradition, such weapons are prohibited." By ancient tradition, this is a book from thousands of years ago, by ancient tradition, because it violates the human conscience. And that's the duty of religion, to define the human conscience as sacred, as holy, as transcending national identity, religious identity, all identities, because it relates to the divine. And that's what makes us human. And that's why religions have this particular responsibility in this realm. So Yale University Divinity School published this one, they did a conference on the subject, and I brought a whole bunch of these. And the way this got done was, there was George Schultz wrote the intro. It's really Jonathan Shell, may he rest in peace, is in there, and fantastic. So afterwards, I was having dinner with some of the trustees there, and I said, you know, the Norwegian sovereign fund, which they got from the windfall of the oil, is prohibited from investing in enterprises that grossly violate ecology, the environment, violate human rights, child labor, and weapons of indiscriminate effect, landmines, cluster munitions, and nuclear weapons. And this fund has done very well. What are your guidelines for your investments of the endowment of Yale Divinity School? And they said, well, our guidelines are to do what is legally permissible to maximize profits, so we can have scholarships, quality education, and all the good things that we do. And I said, well, that's really good. Now, at that time, I was practicing law, and I had some clients that I did get rid of when I realized what they were doing. It was a bunch of accountants in South Jersey, and they had a company that were making grossly offensive pornographic films. And I got rid of those clients. I found it really creepy. But they were making 25% on their investment. 25% a year was extremely profitable. So I suggested to the trustees there, what do you think? Would you be interested in my putting you together with this film company that makes these pornographic films? Because you'd make a lot of profit. It's perfectly legal under the First Amendment. They were just shocked at the proposition and said, what? I said, well, I mean, my understanding is you don't feel any constraint in other than the law. This is perfectly legal, and you're not following the guidelines. So it appears to me you're perfectly comfortable investing in enterprises that will destroy the future of humanity, but you're offended by raunchy sex. Is that your standard? I'm convinced that if we had a student movement and a movement within churches, synagogues, and mosques to adopt the guidelines of a secular state, Norway, with those three principles, human rights, environment, and disarmament, that we would win that debate. we would win that debate hands down, because that was why I'm recounting this to encourage what Religions for Peace put forward as the Landau responsible investment proposal, which is that religions should be challenged to invest their resources along the lines of the Norwegian investment. And the reason that's important is not just because it's practical, but it's correct. And it highlights the integration of the unsustainability of inequity toward children. It highlights the concordance of environmental responsibility and nuclear disarmament. And last but not least, nuclear weapons present an institutionalization of adversity that precludes the level of cooperation needed to protect our third love. And so the idea that you would negotiate cooperation while on Monday, and then on Tuesday, you're threatening total annihilation over your identity. You're saying, it's Samson, because you're saying, we now know that if 2% of the arsenals were to go off, it would throw enough soot into the stratosphere to destroy the user. So it's not mutually assured destruction, mad, it's gone to self-assured destruction, sad. And, so it's mad and sad. That's what the science is telling us. And that's the situation that we're in. So I think that if we can get religious institutions to start explaining to people what's at stake, we have to have the energy of the spirit to win this, because nuclear weapons are inherently immoral and illegal. They're illegal because they can't discriminate between civilians and combatants. And they're immoral because they put the very sanctity of life itself, all life, at risk. And that's why this work is so important, and why thank you for convening us.